Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for being here today for this webinar event on workforce development. This is the Optics and Photonics Caucus's second event since we launched earlier this year and just the start of our efforts to support this very, very important industry. We have an important discussion slated to begin in just a few minutes, but before we do, I'd first like to thank my partners in the Optics and Photonics Caucus for their leadership and support. It is a privilege to be joined by a co-chair, honorary co-chair from the United States Senate, Senator Steve Daines from Montana. We're going to be joined, I hope, momentarily by my co-founder in the House and co-chair, Congressman Brian Mast from Florida. And I also want to thank Senator Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona. Together, the four of us represent some of the largest optics and photonics clusters in America. And the focus of our caucus is to share the knowledge of what this industry can offer and connect members with their own clusters to ensure we support this very important growing field. And today we're here to discuss the years-long workforce strategies optics and photonics companies have dealt with, an issue that has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. We know that strengthening our growing optics and photonics industry is critical to maintaining America's position as a leader in global innovation and helping our economy to recover, not to mention the importance to our national security. But we can't get any of that going without the workforce to do the job. In my own district of Rochester, New York, I've long heard from businesses in this industry that they have jobs available, but can't find the talent to fill them. In our region, industry leaders have focused on both college and graduate degrees and high school curriculums designed to engage students in optics and photonics, setting them up to achieve a high-paying job developing products that literally will change our world. And locally, we have a solid foundation, but the demand for skilled technicians is still far outweighing that supply. So this is a significant challenge, and I'm grateful to our experts for joining us today to help dig into the issues at hand. But before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to turn it over to our co-chairs for some introductory remarks. And first up, I'm delighted to be joined by Senator Daines of Montana. Senator, thank you. I know there's a lot going on, but I appreciate you taking time to be with us, and I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Hey, Congressman, thank you. And a big thanks for joining today's Optics and Photonics Caucus briefing. I started my day out, in fact, a few hours ago on a Zoom call with the American Chamber of Commerce, Shanghai. As some of you may know, during my 28 years in the private sector, I'm the only chemical engineer in Congress. I'm a big and passionate believer in STEM, but I had the chance to work in China actually for 6 years for Procter & Gamble, launching American brands to compete against Chinese companies. So I'm very aware of the battle that we face and the race in front of us here to ensure that we lead the world in innovation, particularly in this critical field of optics and photonics. I want to thank my fellow co-chairs, Senator Sinema, as well as Congressman Morelle and Mast, for leading this effort. And I'm really excited to have one of my hometown heroes, Mr. Trent Berg, the president of the Montana Photonics Industry Alliance, with us here today. Let me just give you a little shout out on Montana. We're finding out on the workforce side, some of the smartest folks like to live in the most beautiful places. And so they usually will tell their folks are going out to study sciences at Montana State. They're really to go out there and ski a lot more and fish and backpack and ice climb and all the great things we do in Montana. But I was part of a cloud computing company we started up in Montana. Over 12 years, we took the company public. Oracle eventually acquired us, but we built an enterprise cloud computing company headquartered in Montana. And we had this, what we think was an advantage of a wonderful place to live, to raise families, and also not have to compromise having a world-class experience as it relates to sciences and building enterprise companies. And we're leading the charge in Montana. We've got a great cluster of optics and photonics companies in our state. Mr. Berg knows well the benefits and the challenges that come along with this growing high-tech sector. In fact, in my hometown of Bozeman, which I went to kindergarten through college there, we have the highest concentration on a per capita basis of photonics companies in the United States. So it's kind of this secret that's becoming a more well-known secret there in Montana. As we're seeing some growth and more people wanting to come to our great state for the quality of life, but also for the great opportunities. So I look forward to this great panel and work with my colleagues to grow these high-tech jobs and ensure the United States leads the world in innovation. This is a big, big deal. Just hearing this morning from our American companies on the ground in Shanghai. This is a very important race, and we've got to win it for the sake of our long-term competitiveness in this global market. So thanks much. I'll turn it back over to you. Appreciate it.
Senator, thanks so much. We so value your public sector experience, but also your private sector experience and your devotion to continue to help the United States lead the world in innovation. So I'm grateful to you for your partnership and for your friendship. I now, as I indicated, Senator Sinema of Arizona is unable to join us today, but the senator asked, and we were delighted that she provided some remarks that I'm now pleased to share with you.
Arizona Senior Senator. I'm honored to be part of today's Optics and Photonics Caucus event. Arizona leads the way in innovation, and our state's universities are at the forefront of economic and scientific development. As some of you may know, the University of Arizona is home to the Stewart Observatory and is ranked #1 in the nation by the National Science Foundation for Research in Astronomy and Astrophysics. With the University of Arizona at its heart, the Optics Valley is home to the optics and photonics industry and research cluster in Arizona. This hub of innovation is an economic engine that contributes over $4 billion to our state every year. And with Arizona's rapidly growing semiconductor industry, our state and its innovators will become directly linked to the creation of the new technologies of tomorrow. Our work in Congress to spur innovation yields results back home. After my Bipartisan Chips for America Act, legislation that restores America's leadership in semiconductor manufacturing, Intel announced a $20 billion investment in Arizona, creating thousands of new Arizona jobs. Now, that's just one example of how common sense bipartisan legislation can open paths for innovation and economic growth. And that's why I'm so proud to be an honorary co-chair of our bipartisan Optics and Photonics Caucus, and I'm grateful for your partnership to enhance America's competitiveness and ensure that we continue to lead in innovation. Thanks for having me, and I hope you have a productive day.
Thank you very much to Senator Sinema for her continued leadership and for her sending along some remarks. And again, she sends her regrets for not being able to join us. Congressman Mast, who is my co-chair in the House, is currently in committee taking votes, but as soon as he has the opportunity to join us, we will give him the opportunity to say to offer some comments as well. But now it's my pleasure to introduce each of our panelists who will make some opening remarks, then we'll sort of dig in a little bit and ask some questions that we would like them to respond to. So first up, we have Dr. Alexis Vogt, who has served as the endowed chair and an associate professor of the Optical Systems Technology program at Monroe Community College in my hometown of Rochester, New York, and has done that since September of 2015. MCC is the nation's oldest two-year degree program for training technicians to work in the optics and photonics cluster and industry. And I'm incredibly proud of Alexis's hard work on behalf of our community and on behalf of this industry. Without further ado, Dr. Vogt.
Thank you, Congressman Morelle and co-chairs Congressman Mast, Senator Daines, and Senator Sinema for your leadership of the Optics and Photonics Caucus. And thanks to the National Photonics Initiative for supporting the effort. It's very important that a forward-thinking group continues to focus upon our industry on Capitol Hill. Our optics industry is responsible for remarkable innovations, which improve our lives every day and that maintain our nation's defense superiority and national security efforts. As Congressman Morelle said, I'm the professor and chair of the optics program at Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York, and I'm also the executive director for workforce and higher education at the American Center for Optics Manufacturing, AmeriCom, which focuses on workforce development, supply chain stability, and manufacturing innovation in the precision optics industry nationwide. Workforce development challenges abound in every industry, but within optics, the need is critical. The Finger Lakes region of New York State, home to Monroe Community College, has an estimated annual demand for more than 550 optics technicians. And while enrollments in our optics technician degree and certificate programs are growing, despite the dire enrollment statistics currently rocking higher education overall and community colleges in particular, there are still not nearly enough technicians filling the pipeline here in New York State, let alone across the nation. It is clear that the work of organizations like AmeriCom matter greatly. AmeriCom applies that same spirit of innovation to the development of optics technologies as it does to workforce development. Flexibility in higher education is key, which is why teams at MCC and at AmeriCom support year-round on-campus and online instruction and two-year degree programs, fast-track certificate programs, college and the high school courses, and apprenticeship programs for those already in the workforce. Last week, Rochester hosted the International SPIE OptiFab Conference, the only conference in the United States devoted exclusively to optics manufacturing. I'm pleased to say that more than 240 students from area high schools and Monroe Community College arrived on student day to meet with industry representatives. We clearly know how to engage them. Now, our next step is to help bring this successful recruitment and training model in place here in the Finger Lakes region to the rest of the nation. We look forward to working with the optics and photonics clusters in Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Montana, and others across the country to share our innovative training programs, including our Precision Optics Apprenticeship Program, and share our best practices for expanded enrollment, retention, and graduation of underrepresented populations, as well as our strong alliances with the nation's precision optics network, pre-collegiate educators, and industry partners. Our optics and photonics industry has well-paying, in-demand jobs that are ensuring technological superiority for the Department of Defense and revolutionizing our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis, for all the incredible work that you're doing. And it's always a privilege to have you. I appreciate you taking some time to spend with us this afternoon. Next up, we have Jay Coombler, who's the president of Ian Optic North America. Mr. Coombler has over 30 years of entrepreneurial and senior management experience, is a published author, and has developed patents and speaks regularly on photonics. So thank you for joining us, Mr. Coombler. You have the floor, I guess we call it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important event. It's a pleasure to be here. And on one hand, I'm representing Yanoptic. I'm the president of Yanoptic North America. Yanoptic is a company with 4,400 employees all around the world, but we've got manufacturing facilities here in Florida at our headquarters, but also in Huntsville, Alabama, in El Paso, Texas, in Michigan and California. So on one hand, I'm representing Yanoptic because we're growing in all those locations, driven mostly by the semiconductor drive and the chip shortage, but also developing new medical instruments and working on next generation telecommunications. We're growing, but we're having a hard time filling those positions. So I'm here to speak for Yanoptic, but I wanted to make it clear also that we're really in this all together in our industry. We're working closely with Alexis and Katie and Trent, and we're all in the same boat trying to solve this problem and trying to grow our industry. That we're working as well as we can together on sharing best practices and exchanging things like apprentice programs. And Alexis pointed out that in Rochester, we all came together and worked hard in different workshops and panels trying to find solutions. So pleasure to be part of this caucus. It's a real honor. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jay, for your leadership. And I appreciate the sentiment that everyone is working together to try to really address this. And we're going to get back to you to give you an opportunity to address some questions related to particularly your experience in the private sector. And now I want to turn to Trent Berg, who, as Senator Daines introduced, is the president of Montana Photonics Industry Alliance. Mr. Berg is currently the program director for the Photonics and Laser Technology program at Gallatin College, Montana State University. He joined Gallatin College in 2016 after working in the photonics industry in the Gallatin Valley for 12 years. Mr. Berg also is a senior hardware engineer at Aurora Innovations Incorporated. Trent, the webinar is yours.
Thank you, Congressman Morelle, and thank you, Senator Daines, for your great shout out and your great words in your opening remarks. I could pretty much, second everything Alexis said from a motivational area. Workforce shortages are everywhere, especially in our industry right now. as you mentioned in the beginning comments, Congressman Morelle, nobody's avoiding this issue right now, and the pandemic's only kind of exacerbated the issue to some level. I'm a strong believer in functioning ecosystems can make a big impact on any issue that we face. The folks represented here on the caucus represent a lot of the high functioning ecosystems in our nation, Florida, Arizona, New York, Montana, and obviously others, Colorado, New Mexico, Michigan, stuff like that. And I think it's really essential that we capitalize on those really high functioning ecosystems to really attack this problem. And really a high functioning ecosystem, in my opinion, is the ability of having a large basis of companies in our industry, having an educational system that can support that locally, and then really good collaboration with our government agencies as well, to make sure that our voices are being heard and that we're doing the appropriate things together to address these issues. And really, what Alexis mentioned was, how do we work together to grow a workforce for this industry? In my opinion, I think it's very strongly focused around the ability of industry and academia to work very, very closely together. This could be increased involvement in graduate research programs. I know we're talking mostly technician basis here, but industry-sponsored research, I think, is a big area where we can get a lot of collaboration going there to make sure students are being trained in the appropriate fields as they come into the workforce, and collaborate for increased technical education. AmeriCom, Alexis, that you mentioned, is very critical in that. And really some examples of what we've done here in Montana. As Senator Daines mentioned, we have a really strong ecosystem here. We have a very high density of optics and photonics companies. We have a really high functioning engineering school that has an optics and photonics emphasis at Montana State University. Gallatin College, which is a 2-year workforce development arm of Montana State University, has a really, we mentioned, has a strong emphasis in optics and photonics. And we have a very supportive government system here as well. And really, we had to attack this problem a little bit differently because Montana is a rural state, hasn't been historically well known for having an optics and photonics emphasis and an innovative hotbed in those areas. So in 2015, the MPIA that I represent worked with Gallatin College to really address the technician workforce shortage that we had here. We just didn't have a really good workflow pipeline into Montana from the other strong colleges like Monroe and others around the nation. So we worked together to form the Laser and Technology program at Gallatin College. It's an associate program, a 2-year program, just like Monroe Community Colleges. And the key part about that, it was industry driven, right? Industry is the one that came up with the skill sets that we needed that really addressed our local emphasis and technology here. Went to the Gallatin College, worked together, got it passed through the Board of Regents together, did the surveys together, and it was very a collaborative exercise there. And really, over the last 5 years, we've graduated nearly 40 students out of that program and 100% employment in the local valley here. And so, literally in 4 years, we've erased a problem. We had a massive technician workforce shortage issue 5 years ago, and right now we do not have that. And so I think those are examples that we want to take to other areas, other ecosystems that we can grow upon, and really make sure we focus on doing that in these strong ecosystems where we can have that strong growth. So I've worked with Alexis in the past, and the things that she's doing there are fantastic. And the stuff that we're doing at Gallatin College to continue to grow that I think will help make a regional and national impact as well. And really transitioning that to new industries also, like quantum and other areas like that, I think is going to be a big focus of ours in the future. So thank you guys again for allowing me to be on this caucus, and I look forward to an engaging conversation.
Trent, thanks so much. We're delighted to have you, and also very much appreciate your comments about academia and the private sector working together. I don't think we can do this without that, ongoing, very close collaboration. Let me introduce our final panelist to say a few words. Katie Schwartz, who's a senior design engineer at Edmund Optics, Tucson, Arizona office. I promise I did not know when we put this together that Katie comes from upstate New York, so that's not why she's here. She's accomplished. She's responsible for executing optical and optomechanical designs, tolerancing analyses, and prototype evaluations for both internal development and external customers. Ms. Schwartz joined Edmund Optics in November of 2010 and has served in various capacities, including as an optomechanical design engineer and an optical research engineer. So without further ado, Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Morelle, for having me. I was just absolutely thrilled when I first saw the caucus, even hearing about it being formed and then being asked to be on the panel. As you mentioned, I believe that you didn't know that in advance. I did grow up in Western New York, and I attended the University of Rochester for undergrad. And then I relocated to Arizona to come down to the University of Arizona in Tucson. So I have an undergrad and master's degree in optics, and as you mentioned in the introduction, have been in the industry with Edmond Optics for the past 11 years. And I've always been involved with the optics community. I love the term ecosystem that Trent used for optics. It's a very high functioning optics community nationally, globally, and locally here in Arizona. We have the Optics Valley Industry Cluster that is active here, that is part of the statewide Arizona Technology Council. And I'm involved with both of those, as well as one of the two major nonprofits that supports optics. Alexis had mentioned Sbie, who hosted the OptiFab conference. I'm currently serving on their board of directors. And so having experienced the Rochester region, the Arizona region, getting to see kind of an international flavor from Sbie and Edmond Optics, where I work as a global manufacturer of optical components and subsystems, you really get a flavor for the industry across all of those perspectives. Edmond Optics' slogan for the past number of years has been "The future depends on optics," and I think that's very apt, because it's not the future would be better with some optics, or the future is helped by optics. Like, the future depends on optics. It is a field that it is unbelievable to me how many people are unaware of it, because you use it and rely on it every single day. We serve markets in semiconductor and chip processing, advanced materials processing, in defense and aerospace, in biomedical, doing diagnostics, which obviously with COVID has been a massive field this past year. And so the importance of maintaining a pipeline and a workforce is so important. And it's funny, we're having all these conversations now about workforce shortages with COVID and the Great Resignation. But when I went into my undergrad in the early aughts, at that time, they were saying, there's never enough workers, there's 100% placements, really well-paying jobs. And I don't think that's changed in that time. So I would say we run on a continual workforce shortage over the past 20 years. I'm glad that we're having the conversations and raising the awareness. It is really critical to all of our futures. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your comments and for all your good work. And maybe I'll start for you and for the other panelists to just touch on something you were just commenting on, and that is that we really had workforce shortages prior to the pandemic. And I remember visiting with Alexis and visiting with some companies back in Rochester prior to COVID, and they were already talking about workforce shortages. But I'm wondering if anyone can comment on how the hiring challenges have changed since COVID. Are there special barriers now that we need to be thoughtful about? Is it changed dramatically, or is it simply the same thing, only doubled or tripled since COVID? So are there differences that are substantive that we're experiencing now than prior to the pandemic?
I'd be happy to start by answering that from the student's perspective, and then I'll turn it over to Jay to get some insight into how his company has been impacted by COVID. When COVID hit in March of 2020, I immediately was concerned that I was going to lose all of my students in the program. And we'd had this historic growth in the program. There were 5 students when I started at MCC 6 years ago. We now have 101, but I was really concerned I was going to lose the students because they'd be losing their jobs. And if they were losing their jobs, they wouldn't be able to afford to come to Monroe Community College. Many of the students in my program already work in the optics industry. I was shocked to find out that every single student maintained their job because all of the optics companies were deemed essential. So this was, recall, at a time when medical facilities were deemed essential and really not much else, but the entire optics industry was deemed essential. In fact, my students were working more than they had worked before, because optics is enabling technology in so many areas, and specific to COVID, in the COVID research and diagnostics and development of vaccines and the testing, all optics enabled. So from my perspective, our program has grown tremendously, but we aren't anywhere in the need yet to fill the need for technicians that we have, not even in the Rochester area here. But Jay, perhaps could you add something a little bit more about what you saw yourself as a
Sure. So we were definitely growing before COVID, as you've already said. And the effect on us from COVID was mitigated by the fact that we're a diversified company and we're selling into a number of different markets. So some markets like aviation, automotive were heavily affected by COVID, but we were bolstered by the fact that other of our markets were still going strong. I mean, we managed to not have any layoffs or have to let anyone go. I think the smart companies, our industry, continued investing, continued hiring as best they possibly could, and prepared for what we thought was going to come this year in 2021. So now the situation, I think it is a one-time effect from COVID, where we've got a lot of demand from 2020 stacking up against 2021 demand. A lot of development projects were delayed by our customers last year. Now we're being told ship as fast as you can. We still want to launch that new product in next year, even though we didn't start on it last year. So quite a bit of pressure on all the workers throughout our industry. But the most important thing is all of the mega trends are going in the direction of demanding more optics and photonics content. So whether you want to talk about healthcare, aging workforce, the promise of genome sequencing and personalized medicine, advanced telecommunications, our safety and security. I mean, all of these different areas, and we're going to talk, I think, about some emerging markets a little bit later. But these mega trends are driving all of our industry. So it's a one-time effect from COVID, but we're on a 20-year growth track, like Katie just mentioned. And I think we're experiencing that across the country and around the world, for that matter.
Yeah, and has the pandemic made it more difficult to attract workers, or is that seem sort of like what you had been experiencing prior to the pandemic?
Thank you for that second question. So I think it's made it challenging. It was very disruptive for families, for people taking care of their kids. A lot of people were displaced. So I would say that the community colleges that we work with really did struggle with input, with finding students, and there was an interruption. I think it's fair to say, I hope, at both Indian River and at Valencia, there was an impact from COVID that reduced the amount of students to a certain extent. But even beyond the schools, the ability, we struggle now with being able to recruit. And I do think it's exacerbated by the COVID.
Yeah. So Jay, I want to just ask you also about, so you talked a little bit about industry trends that are going to affect the need for technicians as this space continues to be a requirement for so many different industries.
Sure.
And happy to have you expand upon that. But I'm also curious as to, because you're an international company, are the facilities overseas facing the same problems in terms of labor shortages? Are there any tactics or things being done abroad that we might learn from and that we should consider implementing here?
So overseas, we're driven by the same two main factors of the chip shortage and the semiconductor growth, which is driven by the Internet of Things and autonomous vehicles and a lot of other factors. And then consumer electronics. So everything related to the devices that you carry around in your pocket, your tablets, and then new topics like AR, VR. That's all driving the optics industry across the board. And that's definitely a global topic. As you know, a lot of that production is in Asia. So as far as what we're doing differently in other parts of the world, I mean, the one comment I can make is that certainly I think there's a stronger trade school programs in Germany especially. And I think it's fair to say throughout Europe. So that doesn't mean that solves the problem. There's still high competition for qualified applicants and for new employees. But I think that somehow maybe there's a bigger acceptance or appreciation of the trade schools, and maybe it's just more established channels and ecosystems like Trent was talking about, where in Jena, in our headquarters in Germany, I mean, a number of schools there all feeding the companies, but still a high competition for every single qualified student.
Yeah. I wonder, Trent, if you have anything to add to that, and also love to ask if folks have had a chance to look at the National Apprentice Act, which would really expand apprentice opportunities away from sort of the traditional industries where we think of them, and really try to get them into industries that have not typically had pre-apprentice and apprentice programs, and whether or not that's something that you think would be of value here. But Trent, did you have any additional thoughts?
I mean, I'll second what Jay said. I mean, we've continued to see growth in our industry here in Montana. We're in a lot of high-tech growth areas: quantum, LiDAR, autonomous vehicles, gas mapping, high-power lasers, defense type stuff, where none of that slowed down really at all. So I would say the same things that happened at Unoptic, as far as people, displaced workers, causing a backlog of work that now we're facing in a very large way to get uncovered from that and get back to our deliverables is the biggest challenge right now. I wouldn't say hiring is a big challenge right now. I think people want to come back to the workforce. I think it's the lower paying jobs where we're having a bigger struggle on, getting workforce in, shipping and receiving, administrative, things of that nature. And so regarding your question about the apprenticeship program, it's a really interesting question too. And I think Alexis would be good to chime in here. There's kind of two different models you can think about as far as an apprenticeship program, where it's not maybe works through a community college or a technical college. It's just on the job training. And we've definitely looked at those programs here in Montana to see if it made sense to spin up an apprenticeship program for optics and photonics. We steered away from that to the 2-year associate's degree. A lot of our industries here in Montana, being in high power lasers, LiDAR sensors, autonomous vehicles, quantum, really do need that sort of formal education background to be able to succeed in those industries, and not only work on the manufacturing floor, but work as engineering technicians, which is essentially an engineering job, just with a 2-year degree. And so we've most certainly geared our efforts towards really strengthening our 2-year program. As Jay mentioned, we did see a very large impact in enrollment. And I think one area where the caucus can really help is taking these high functioning technical colleges that exist, like Monroe, Front Range, Gallatin College, Indian Hills, Indian River, and making sure we do a good job to help promote those programs as areas where you should go here to get these degrees. There should be no reason whatsoever that any of these programs are under enrolled if we work together to make sure that they're properly promoted. And all of those programs, I think, have the ability to grow as well in size. We could double or triple our capacity, with some reasonable amount of funding, but you have to have the recruiting pipeline, the backlog of students that want to take that program to be able to sort of justify that growth. So I would say, to answer your question, I think apprenticeship programs can apply. I think they can apply to the areas where we don't really need that 2-year formal education, where potentially a certificate or an apprenticeship could apply to that. But the areas that I'm mostly focused on that I mentioned, I feel like the 2-year education is very important, and potentially you could supplement that with an apprenticeship as well that could maybe transfer nationally. But I do feel like the AAS and photonics and laser technology, or whatever you want to call it, electro-op technician programs, they're all called something slightly different. They're all the same vein there, but I would turn it over to Alexis to ask her opinion on that.
And before I do that, Alexis, just to clarify, when we sort of use the word technician, the way that you've just described it really implies at least a 2-year degree to be at that level. Is that sort of generally accepted throughout the industry? So when I'm using the term technician level of training, does that typically imply at least a 2-year degree? And maybe Alexis.
It can, not necessarily. I mean, Alexis can comment as well, but we call it, mostly in Montana, we use the term assemblers as doing the more generic work. That does not necessarily need a 2-year education. Actually, they may prefer that it doesn't, so they don't have to pay quite the salary they would have to a person with a degree. And so I think there's levels inside of a company where you potentially don't need that formal education, and they would still be called a technician, but potentially an assembler, an optomechanical assembler. But as you sort of be the integrator of systems or high power lasers, definitely the 2-year formal background is very much preferred. And that was part of our survey we did at Galton College of our employers is, do you want a 2-year formal education for your technicians? And the answer was overwhelmingly yes for the higher end positions within those companies.
Gotcha. Alexis, did you have something to add to that?
Yes, please. The way
Okay.
I often will differentiate the role of a technician is compared to someone who would have an engineering background. Engineer is someone who would typically have a bachelor's, master's, PhD, who would likely sit at a computer and design a system. A technician is someone who works with their hands side by side with engineers to manufacture, to test, to measure, to do the assembly, as Trent mentioned. People who make excellent optics technicians are artists, musicians, gamers, chefs, automobile mechanics, bicycle mechanics, athletes, because they have excellent hand-eye coordination. And they may have no degree at all. They may directly come from the football field into an optics company to be a technician. They may pursue a 1-year certificate program. They may have a 2-year associate's degree. When we think about someone who has a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD, that's how we would differentiate the engineers from the technician. I would like to also follow up a little bit more detail on the apprenticeship program that we are rolling out around the country. And because the optics and photonics industry is what's securing our safety from a national perspective, I secured a $4.4 million grant from the Department of Defense for our optics program here at Monroe Community College. And a portion of that is to roll out a nationwide precision optics apprenticeship. I have a colleague I hired named Ross McCallie, and his job is to work with companies like Jay's and Jenoptik to create an apprenticeship program around the entire United States. So as Jay was mentioning, the German model has been one that for centuries has worked really well. Apprenticeships are part of that. So an apprenticeship is a combination of on-the-job learning and related instruction that's taught in a classroom type environment. So what we have done at Monroe Community College is take our optics classes and make them online, so that now we can provide that related instruction to companies outside of the Rochester area. So you don't have to sit in a classroom in Rochester in order to receive education from MCC. So what we are doing now is rolling out this apprenticeship program around the country, because if we think about all the other trades like plumbers, welders, electricians, they have trade schools, they have apprenticeship programs. And in precision optics, we don't have that. So please contact me and I will put you in touch with my colleague, Ross McCallie, if you are with a company and you're interested in starting an apprenticeship program, because we really do see this as the long-term solution to the workforce shortage within our industry.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'd say is the National Apprenticeship Act, which has passed the House and trying to get a hearing in the Senate, does that. And really looking, I mean, you see the success of apprentice programs for employees and employers, and moving them to sort of non-traditional areas is something that we think in the House, we think makes a fair amount of sense. And I don't know, Katie, were you trying to jump in? I don't want to.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, Pima Community College in Tucson right now has been talking with Alexis about the program that they've rolled out in MCC and looking to emulate that and starting to run classes and looking at an apprenticeship program. I just wanted to echo one of Jay's statements that he said quickly, but I think is really important, is that the US in general has de-emphasized societally 2-year programs and the value of the trade part of our industry. And so we feel that, even outside of optics technicians, I think just with traditional machining knowledge among our engineering staff and our technician staff. So I do think, I can't necessarily speak to how that's viewed internationally, but at least in the US, I think re-emphasizing getting more people interested in a 2-year degree. We really moved, I think, to a place where a bachelor's degree is kind of expected or needed for everything, to the point where now people with bachelor's degrees and myself with a master's degree have gone and taken community classes for continuing education around trade work and working with our hands and making sure we can, be functional in a lab alongside technicians. So I think a re-emphasis on 2-year trades could be a very important part of the caucus and our international education system.
No, I think it's a great point. I think Trent mentioned this earlier, that there's nothing that precludes having this sort of part formal education, part apprenticeship program. I mean, sort of live in these, ways of thinking about things that traditionally have been the case for decades, but there's certainly no reason why you couldn't combine those experiences and really help students. I noticed when Alexa was going through the list of people like football players and athletes, and she had a whole list of people that could become technicians in space. She did not mention members of Congress, so I'm not sure. Probably she was probably well to avoid us, but and I certainly don't think I have the skills to do it. But I am curious, where are people coming right now into that space? Are they coming right out of high school? Are we seeing people come out of the military? Sort of what are the demographics? I wonder, Alexis, Katie, if you could, or anyone, Trent certainly, and Jay, who's in the private sector, where are people coming from to get into these programs?
Sure, I'd be happy to start, and then I'll hand it over to you, Katie. We are seeing historic growth in our program come from a variety of different routes. One is straight from high school. So we have 16 high schools in the Rochester area where there are teachers in high school teaching my Introduction to Optics MCC course. So those high school students receive MCC credit in high school. That's helping drive some of the enrollment. We're also seeing a lot of career changers. People who are bartenders, they're baristas, they're looking for career opportunities, and they have heard about optics and photonics, and we all have these enabling technologies right in our pockets. And so they now are becoming aware of the field that exists surrounding them. And so they're coming that way. We do have some people who join us from the military, people who have served overseas, and they're using optics on a day-to-day basis, are then coming back for their formal education. And we have a lot of students who are already working for optics companies. Perhaps they were those artists, those musicians, et cetera, from high school who went to work right away for an optics company, and then they're coming back for the formal education as well. And I also wanted to make one additional point, just to follow up briefly on the apprenticeship discussion we were having. Through the apprenticeship program, the way that we have structured it, the apprentices themselves end up earning their associate's degree through this path. So just as you were saying, Congressman Morelle, about combining the two, that's precisely what we're trying to do. And really, it does end up being a benefit for both the apprentice as well as the company too. So we're seeing growth in all sorts of areas. I mean, people are becoming really interested in this area, but let me turn it over to Katie, and you can add in your other thoughts on where you're seeing our field grow.
Yeah, so I think for us, our primary pipeline is certainly the local community colleges and universities. Edmond Optics is headquartered in Barrington, New Jersey, and they have very strong ties to the 2- and 4-year colleges around there. I will say the optics industry gets creative about where it recruits from. I mean, there's just not enough optics programs to support hiring people with optics degrees. So we pretty much pull from any engineering or physics type background for our engineers. For people with 2-year degrees, if you can work with your hands, and like Alexis said, that's a lot of different disciplines, we train you internally. So I think a lot of the optics industry does what Edmond Optics does, and it's pull people who have the aptitude, who have some knowledge of general engineering and assembly, and then we bring them in-house and teach them the specifics of optical assemblies and optical engineering. I'm sorry?
No, I was just going to ask you before we started, you talked about, and Alexis, about how you got into the industry. When you were in high school, you were sort of exposed to it. Were you, and I hate to ask you like one data point, but were you like an AP physics math whiz? Is that, what was your background that you suddenly thought, well, this is really kind of an interesting thing, and it is that the sort of level, or what are we looking for in terms of, raw talent for kids, even in high school, to introduce them to what we do?
Yeah, so yes, I did have the good fortune of running into Alexis as a senior in high school and ending up in the optics industry. And if you ask anyone in optics, overwhelmingly, the overwhelming majority of people stumble into it. It is not a field that people know when they're kids or is advertised in school counselors' offices. They kind of stumble upon it being in the industry or having a relative or something like that. I'll say I was a good student in school, but man, physics never quite clicked for me, which is kind of an odd thing to say as an optical engineer. But traditional physics I was never all that interested in, and I liked numbers. I'll say I liked numbers when I was a student, and when I learned about optics, it just seemed like a really interesting applied field to take math and numbers and knowledge and apply them to real world problems and technology that could help people. So that's what caught my interest. I think in general, if you're going down an engineering track, they're tough programs. You do need, a strong, I'd say, background in math or science. But I think that's different when you're talking about a technician, somebody that works with their hands. I don't think we have plenty of people that I don't even bother looking at their GPA when we interview them because I don't care. What I catch is if they were involved with, like Alexis said earlier, like they work in their local garage and help out on the weekend because they like cars, or they've built up their own software package for, their fantasy football team, or, all sorts of things. And that's the type of thing that catches my attention more than grades in school. So I do think it's important to understand the amount of places you can take your education within the optics industry. We have people in sales, we have people in marketing, we have people in hard technical degrees, but all of that has to kind of enable the industry to go forward. So whether you work with your hands or like working a computer with people or by yourself, I mean, there's a place in the industry. Just to finish my thought process before on the where we're recruiting from here in Tucson, the University of Arizona is certainly kind of the epicenter of supporting the local industry. I think over half of our office of 30 so people here is degreed from Arizona. And that has certainly generated the whole kind of startup ecosystem that we have down here. And I think having that local bubble of a pipeline is really important. And I think you hear it. And that's why we have a representative from Rochester and Montana and Florida and Tucson, because everyone's created their own local structure. So having national attention and a national structure, I think, can really help pull that all together.
Yeah, I'm sort of curious too, as it relates to, there's a lot of talk around diversity, trying to make sure that we open up and give opportunities to people of color, to women who traditionally haven't been well represented in the STEM industries. How, and maybe Jay and Katie can sort of address it in the private sector. How are you addressing that? Is that a concern? Are there special things that you're doing to try to reach out to non-traditional communities?
First off, it's a big concern and a big area of focus for Yanoptic, and I think for our entire optics industry. And you can't increase the diversity of your workforce just by trying or hoping.
Right.
You really have to change your approach. Like Katie said, you have to cast a wide net, but you have to recruit in different platforms. You have to look for new strategies for recruiting a more diverse workforce, which takes planning, which takes execution. So you don't just hope to get there. It's like hoping to be able to run a marathon. So you have to change our approach. And I'm not the best qualified person to say tactically every little step that we're doing to do that. I just am very proud of our team that they've been able to increase the diversity here at Yanoptic over the last few years. But it's a double challenge. There's a challenge to fill positions, but we're committed to a more diverse workforce. And one thing that I would say about the great story with Katie meeting Alexis, I think everyone that's listening on this event realizes that we can all go back to basically one teacher or one person that inspired us. And we collectively, everyone that's listening on the caucus, we have to use a little bit of our time and a little bit of our passion to go and either visit the high school classes or just inspire the people that you naturally come in contact with at school with your kids or at your church or wherever, and use events like the landing of the Mars rover, where it's sexy and it's exciting for 8th graders and 10th graders and 12th graders. We have to do that because it works, right? It actually works. That Katie had a fire that was lit in her and she was excited about learning more about it. So we need programs and educational platforms for sure, but it's also really about being able to tell why you're so passionate about the optics industry and just changing the life of one or two students along the way.
Well, it really is interesting you say that. One of the things that I hope that we might be able to do as part of the optics and photonics cluster is to bring some of that technology here, to expose it to members of Congress and policymakers. I think I was telling you before we came on, in the last couple of weeks, I've been to the laser lab for energetics at the University of Rochester, and I was at a private sector facility that deals with lenses and lasers. And I literally, my mind was blown to go through and see the technologies and the work that they're doing and the people that were engaged in it. it really is eye-opening, and frankly, to someone who's completely uninitiated and a layperson, to think about the applications now that are required. And I think it was either Alexis or Katie said at the outset that these aren't just nice things to have. These are essential to our lives, whether it's healthcare or transportation or communications. But I think the more we expose people, as you said, Jay, and really can excite people about the challenges. I want to just ask Trent, you mentioned earlier that you weren't having as much of a challenge in Montana with workforce shortages. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit, how are your companies and the colleges working together to address it, and what strategies do you think are being successful that we should think about implementing in other places?
Yeah. Well, I already mentioned in my opening statements about the work that the MPIA, which is the Montana Photonics Industry Alliance, did with Gallatin College to essentially solve a local workforce problem. So, and I really emphasize that in my opening statements about that collaboration, that this was an industry-driven and a very collaborative work with the college itself. So I think that's really, really important. We're continuing to work with Montana State University, the graduate programs there, to really emphasize to our local companies and regional companies about doing more industry-sponsored research, get projects that are non-proprietary into the university system, so they're being trained on the actual technologies that they're going to be working on when they leave the university or the academic setting. And I think that's really, really important. We're also working together. I think a lot of the other clusters, Rochester, Arizona, have, essentially centers of excellence, Florida, Creole, things of that nature. I think those are really important incubators for a lot of that stuff. And I think it's important from a national perspective to take advantage of the ecosystems that we have and really grow those with these centers of excellence that really bring in academia, government, and industry all together to collaborate to push things forward. And it's something that we're actively working on at Montana State University with the MPIA to go after an engineering research center to really bolster that and create a really strong collaboration between all those entities. And it inherently solve the workforce issues as well. So, I think my statements aren't complex in nature, but I think oftentimes industry and academia can be siloed. And they do their own research, and it's not really applicable fully to the work that's being done in the local community there. And we're trying hard at the MPIA to break those silos down and make sure that there's cross contamination between industry work and academia research programs. Work on internship programs at the community college. Work on these apprenticeship programs as well. And I think that's really the answer, in my opinion, and really drive these centers of excellence in whatever field that we're in optics and photonics into these strong ecosystems that can really take that and grow it. And then just a few other comments too on Alexis, what you said about recruitment. That's spot on. Military people are fantastic. They love coming into the program and working. I also think it's important that, the dropout rates at the four-year education level are very, very high right now. And what we've done is deployed a program at Gallatin College to work with Montana State University engineering advisors to make sure that if people have decided that they want to leave engineering, let's not let them leave the university system. Let's try to capture those people into the technician workforce, because a lot of them, their complaints are, I don't get my hands on stuff until year 2 or 3 of the program. Well, in these technician programs, you get your hands dirty in the first day of these programs, right? So we've had a lot of success, eliminating the dropout rate at 4-year and pulling them into the 2-year workforce. And they're really some of the most fantastic, outstanding students, along with the females, due to their attention to detail, and the military folks as far as their background in technology and their willingness and desire to be part of a team. And so I think all that's really important as well when you talk about recruitment and things of that nature. But I think to answer your question, I feel like I addressed that. But if you have any further questions, Congressman, let me know.
Well, thanks. And what's really also helpful is the notion that this is a career ladder. You could literally start out of high school, get a 2-year degree. You can keep working at it and continue to build to go from an assembler technician to ultimately to an engineer, as Alexis described it. We just have a couple minutes. One thing I'm just curious about, because it's sort of like where the rubber hits the road. So talk to our listeners about the quality of the job, sort of salary prospects, career longevity, opportunity for growth. Can anyone just sort of give obviously it will vary from region to region, industry to industry, and along that career ladder, but What can you tell us about that? Anybody?
Yeah, I'd like to take that one if that's all
Yeah.
right. So SBIE puts out a global salary survey every year. It's available on their website. It has some great information. It breaks down by looking at different countries, looking at different sectors, also talks about diversity and demographics that you had mentioned earlier. So this past year, the median salary in US for employees in the optics and photonics industry was over 133,000 salary. For technicians, the national median right now is about a little over $30 an hour. And I don't know if Alexis, you might have some different local numbers, but about a $63,000 salary is the median for technicians. And they can typically expect to start around a 45 to 55K starting salary with a 2-year degree. The other thing that is, I wanted to mention that I think it's important for the people who are listening to this call is the optics industry is a bit unique in the sense that it is largely comprised of small and medium-sized enterprises. So there's not a lot of, GEs or, major IBM companies in optics. The people supplying optics and photonics companies, some of the numbers I pulled out of the industry report that we have is that the global photonics components revenue globally is around $282 billion revenue, but 75% of the companies in optics globally have a less than $10 million revenue stream. And so the large majority of the companies are small that are supporting this industry. And so when we talk about recruiting and diversity, it's important, but a lot of them don't have the large enabled human resources systems and things like that to truly put the effort into a diversity program. At Admin Optics, we've definitely worked on having a DE&I committee that addresses diversity. We look at pay gaps and things like that, but women still only represent about 20% of the optics and photonics industry. There's still a wage gap, although it's much less in the early years and much more pronounced later stages in career. But I think that's important to understand about the industry when you talk about it. And when you talk about other diversities, I noticed one of the people in the chat mentioned there's lots of different diversities besides gender. I mean, Black representation right now in optics, photonics, and physics is less than 1 to 2%. So there's lots of work to be done there. And I think with a workforce shortage, it makes the ground fertile for recruiting from all aspects of our society.
That's certainly for sure. I had hoped to get to questions around sort of supply chain and manufacturing in the United States. Unfortunately, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll do that in a later panel. But I just want to ask if there's any final thoughts by our panelists before I close this session. Any additional thoughts?
I would just like to add that we are heavily recruiting more students. So please tell your friends, your family members, we'll even take your enemies, send them our way into our industry. We really are growing like crazy. We're the technology that's enabling the future advancements, things like charging your smartphone only once a month. That technology is being developed right now. And we just need more people. And we're diversifying. We're 30% female, 28% students of color here in our optics program at MCC and looking to continue to grow that as well. Thank you for this opportunity, for the great work, and please contact me with any other additional follow-up.
Yeah, I think anyone on the panel would be happy to talk more with anyone willing to support optics and photonics. So we're all here for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll second Alexis, right? Gallatin College is growing. They need more people, spread the word. Let's get people in the workforce. Let's do youth outreach. The MPIA is doing a lot of youth outreach with our YMCA, Montana Science Center. There's no reason we can't get people excited about it. Kids love lasers. They love light. It's easy to grab people's attentions. We should have no problem with workforce if we get out there and really reach out to our middle school and high schools and really spread the word to get our enrollment up in our graduate programs and our technical programs as well. So appreciate the opportunity as well. And definitely let's get the word out there.
Great. Jay?
It's a solvable problem. That's the good news. I mean, if we work together, and we just have to have our stories, be able to tell the story, like you said, Congressman. It's complicated and it's complex, but we need to be able to tell clear and simple stories about why we're so excited about our career.
Well, thank you. I did learn one thing. Apparently, to run a marathon, you need a plan, which may explain a lot about my lack of success in marathons. So, but I do want to thank our panelists for joining this critical discussion today. To my optics and photonics caucus partners, and I'm sorry that a Representative Mass wasn't able to join us, but we'll certainly get him on our next session. Thank them for helping to lead the effort. To all our listeners for tuning in today, I hope this has been an illuminating discussion, pun intended, and hopefully we'll get together soon. if we weren't able to get to the questions in the chat, but my team will be following up with each of you. And as it relates to my team, I want to give a big shout out to Joe Stiles, my legislative director, who does so much work in this space to bring all this together and to try to make me look at least somewhat knowledgeable on these subjects. So I appreciate all the work that she does. And I encourage our congressional stakeholders listening to consider joining our bipartisan bicameral caucus, and for our industry experts, encourage your representatives to join us in this important work. So again, thank you so much, your panelists, for all the work you do, for being here today, and thank all of you. God bless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.